In the heat of a forgotten summer, on a dusty roadside where only the wind remembers names, an old man found two tiny souls tangled in barbed wire. Their eyes, too young to carry that kind of fear. His hands, too tired to believe he still had a purpose. But what he did next would ripple across an entire town. Would you stop for two whimpering puppies, even if it meant reopening the deepest wounds in your heart? Fairford in July was a town preserved in amber, unmoving, sun-bleached, and too quiet for its own good. Nestled among the flatlands of the American Midwest, it lay under an endless sky that buzzed with cicadas and bore down with the kind of heat that made even the clouds too lazy to drift. The cornfields surrounding the town had grown tall and brittle, swaying like ghostly sentinels in the breeze. The sidewalks cracked from years of neglect, and the road out by Bramble Field, where no one really walked anymore, had become a place forgotten by time and by kindness. In the wild ditch beside that forgotten road, two tiny bodies lay tangled in silence. They were German Shepherd puppies, barely 4 weeks old, their eyes not yet fully adjusted to the harshness of sunlight or life. Their fur, once meant to be the soft armor of youth, was now matted with dirt, dry blood, and remnants of barbed wire that had carved shallow trenches across their small, trembling bodies. One lay half-curled, breathing in tiny, uneven gasps, while the other whimpered through swollen gums, nudging its sibling weakly with a bloodied nose. They didn't understand what had happened. They didn't understand why the hands that had once held them, rough hands, sour with alcohol and rage, had wrapped them in pain and thrown them away like scraps in a rusted bucket. Their mother had vanished 2 nights before, taken away in the back of a pickup truck and never returned. Since then, they'd gone unfed, untended, and then came the wire. Now, under the crushing weight of the summer sun, they lay waiting, not for help, but for the pain to end. The stronger one, slightly larger, bore a black smudge across its right ear and a long welt down its side where the wire had bitten deepest. Its eyes blinked open in short, frantic beats, searching the sky as though something might fall from it to save them. The other, lighter colored with faint tan patches and weaker breath, had grown stiller by the hour, barely flinching at the flies. But it, too, clung to something unseen. Not hope exactly, but the ghost of instinct. Stay alive, stay close, stay quiet. Time moved oddly in the ditch. Shadows crept and shifted, but the puppies didn't move. Their breath was shallow. Their bodies, too young to understand despair, simply shut down to survive. And then there was a sound. Not loud, not like the engines that roared and passed without mercy. This was softer, heavier, the sound of boots on gravel. The rhythm was slow, even, a walk that didn't rush, but didn't hesitate either. It was the walk of someone who had nowhere urgent to be, yet didn't want to stay where he was. A figure emerged down the road, a silhouette against the honey-colored horizon, tall, lanky, worn. His shirt hung loose from thin shoulders, and a battered cap shaded his face. He paused at the edge of the field and squinted, as if something had caught his eye in the long grass. The larger puppy stirred. A scent carried on the wind, not the sting of oil and whiskey like the man who had left them, but something else. Faint tobacco, sun-warmed flannel, old leather. The figure stepped off the pavement, boots crunching into dry weeds. He moved closer. His shape grew more defined. His hands hung open, not clenched. His eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in worry. He was not like the other man, not like the one who had left them here. This man was something else. And as the final rays of sunlight caught the glint of the barbed wire tangled in fur, his steps quickened. He saw them now. Two tiny, broken things half swallowed by grass and heat. He dropped to one knee, and that's when the larger pup, with the black-marked ear and battered ribs, let out a sound. Not a bark, not a growl, but a soft, pleading whimper. And Clifford Marlowe, a man who had buried his past beneath years of silence, found himself unable to look away. Clifford Marlowe stood 6'1", but the years had worn him thinner than his frame could carry without slouch. At 60 years old, he moved with the kind of quiet deliberation that comes from a life spent lifting engines, not conversations. His face was lean and angular, weathered by sun and sorrow. Deep lines etched from the corners of his gray-blue eyes, and a long healed scar crossed just above his left brow, the kind no one asked about, but everyone noticed. He wore a faded flannel shirt over a plain t-shirt, jeans streaked with dust, and boots so old the leather had softened into second skin. He had once been a husband. Long ago, before the silence set in, his wife Clara had passed from a sudden illness in her early 40s, leaving behind a young daughter, Ruth, who grew up fast and moved far. Clifford stayed. He stayed through the funeral, through the grief, through the years of wrenching and fixing and waiting, until one day he found himself alone in a house filled only with tools, photographs, and one dog, Ranger, his final tether to warmth. But even Ranger was taken 6 years ago. Since then, Clifford hadn't touched a leash, hadn't dared to look at a creature that could love him back, until tonight. The ditch beside Bramble Field reeked of heat, iron, and something far worse: cruelty. Clifford crouched, lowering himself beside the 2 tangled German Shepherd puppies, each barely more than a month old. One had a blotch of black fur over its right eye, the other paler, more fragile, its breathing shallow and uncertain. The barbed wire coiled around them had drawn blood in fine, unforgiving lines. Clifford exhaled slowly, pulled his folding knife from the pocket of his jeans, and got to work. Every snip of wire was a small act of rebellion against whatever monster had left them here. His hands, large and calloused, moved with unexpected gentleness as he unwound the twisted metal from soft bellies and tender paws. The larger pup flinched once, but never growled. The smaller stayed still, too still. He removed his flannel shirt and wrapped both puppies inside it, like he was holding the last warm thing left in the world. Then he stood, feeling the ache in his knees as the weight of this moment, and of them, settled in his arms. The road home was short, but under the moon's quiet gaze, it felt longer, heavier. The stars blinked high above the sleeping rooftops of Fairford. No one saw him pass, but the wind and the occasional cicada chirping from the stalks. His house waited at the end of the road, dimly lit, its porch light flickering like a lighthouse guiding a shipwrecked man home. Inside, Clifford moved like a man in a dream. He laid the puppies gently on a towel atop the kitchen counter, then opened the cabinet below the sink and pulled out an old red toolbox, a relic of his working years. From it, he took out a pair of wire snips, a worn roll of gauze, a bottle of hydrogen peroxide that had long since lost its label, and a pair of tweezers still stained from some forgotten project. The stronger puppy whined as the peroxide bubbled in its wounds, its body tense, but it didn't try to escape. The weaker one remained motionless except for the flutter of its breath, faint as the twitch of a dying candle. Clifford washed the blood away gently, whispering to them without thinking, "Hang in there. You're all right now. You're not alone." The house was utterly still, the clock on the wall ticking like a pulse. Clifford didn't notice the time, only the weight of fur, the scent of blood, and the strange warmth growing beneath his ribs. Then came a soft knock at the back door. He turned, startled. Through the glass pane, framed in the warm glow of a porch lamp, stood Martha Delling. Martha was 68, her posture straight, her chin lifted with quiet dignity. Her hair, a soft silver bun, was always neatly tied. Tonight, she wore a sky-blue cardigan over a floral house dress and slippers stitched with little red birds. She carried a small tray, a covered dish in one hand, a cloth-wrapped jar in the other. Her eyes, a calm hazel, took in everything without asking too much. Clifford opened the door. "I saw your light," she said, "and thought maybe you hadn't eaten." She stepped inside before he could answer. The smell of peach cobbler followed her like a second presence. Then she saw the puppies. "Oh my," she breathed. "Clifford." "Out past Bramble," he said, voice gravel soft, wrapped in wire. "Don't know how long they were there." She approached slowly. "You cleaned them?" He nodded. Martha set her tray down on the table and looked at him, not with surprise, but something closer to relief. "I haven't seen you touch a living thing since Ranger," she said gently. Clifford didn't answer. "I was just going to drop this off," she added, motioning to the tray. "But would you like me to stay a while?" He looked at her, truly looked. She was not a woman who intruded. In all the years she'd been his neighbor, she had offered kindness like one offers sunlight to a closed window, without pressure, only presence. "Yeah," he said at last. "I think I would." Martha nodded and moved to sit in the wooden chair beside the counter. She pulled out 2 mismatched mugs from his cupboard without asking, poured tea from the thermos she'd brought, and sat with him while he worked. They didn't talk much after that. They didn't need to. Later, Clifford carried the puppies into the back room, a dusty space that once held tools and now held little more than echoes. He set up an old heater, placed the flannel-lined basket near it, and covered the pups with a clean dish towel. The stronger one nestled into the warmth. The weaker finally stirred, just slightly, a breath steadier than before. Clifford sat on the floor beside them, his back against the wall. He watched them for a long time, the moonlight stretching through the blinds like silver threads across the old wood floor. And in that quiet hour before morning, the man who had sworn never to love again found himself hoping that these two broken souls, and perhaps his own, might make it through the night. The first light of morning crept through the blinds and found Clifford Marlowe still seated on the floor, back against the wall, chin resting on his chest. The heater hummed softly beside the basket, where two small bodies lay curled together under a folded towel. Blitz, the stronger of the two, had his nose buried into his brother's side, his ears flicking at every sound. Dusty, barely conscious, had grown warmer through the night. Too warm. Clifford blinked awake, his bones stiff from the floor, and leaned forward to check on them again. He pressed a rough hand gently against Dusty's belly. The heat radiating from the pup's skin made his gut twist. The little chest rose too fast, breath coming in shallow bursts, and every now and then Dusty would twitch, as if trapped between waking and fading. Clifford moved quickly, rinsing a soft rag in lukewarm water and laying it across the pup's back, checking the warmth every few minutes, trying to cool the fever without shocking the fragile system. Blitz watched his every move with those wide, dark eyes, quiet but alert, his body language tense as if he knew something was wrong. Clifford couldn't tell if he was comforting his brother or guarding him. He tried to feed them both with a plastic syringe filled with diluted goat's milk. Blitz drank slowly but steadily. Dusty barely responded. A small whimper escaped his throat when Clifford stroked behind his ears. That sound hit the old man harder than any silence ever could. Clifford stood and walked into the kitchen. He opened a drawer beneath the sink and pulled out an old coffee tin. It rattled faintly with coins and crumpled bills. He dumped it onto the table and began counting, thumbing through worn 20s, a few 10s, some 5s. It wasn't much, just shy of $200, his emergency stash, meant for a broken water heater or a surprise trip to the clinic for his aching hip. But none of that mattered now. He glanced down the hallway toward the room with the heater's glow and made his decision. Clifford bundled Dusty carefully into a clean towel and placed him in an old wooden fruit crate lined with flannel. Blitz, who had whined the moment Clifford touched his brother, was gently placed beside him. The two pups nestled close. He grabbed his keys, shrugged on his jacket despite the summer heat, and stepped out into the already brightening morning. Fairford was just beginning to wake. The town's sidewalks were still mostly empty, but shop owners had started unlocking doors and adjusting window signs. Clifford's truck rattled as it turned onto Main Street, each bump in the road making him glance down nervously at the crate. He parked in front of Fairford Veterinary Clinic, a squat white building with a sloped green roof and small wind chimes on the porch. The wooden sign, hand-painted with a paw print, swung gently in the morning breeze. Clifford opened the truck door and stepped out, lifting the crate as if it held glass. He walked through the front door, greeted by the familiar scent of antiseptic and dog shampoo. "Fairford Veterinary," came a voice from the hallway. "Be with you in a—" Then silence. Jenna Myers stood in the doorway, clipboard in one hand, glasses sliding halfway down her nose. She stared at Clifford, blinking once, then twice, before her eyes fell to the crate in his arms. "Mr. Marlowe?" she said, her voice catching on the second word. Clifford gave a small nod. "He's burning up. His brother's okay for now, but this one's fading fast." Jenna's face changed instantly, all warmth giving way to clinical focus. "Come back. Exam room's open." She led him down the hall to a pale blue room lined with framed photos of adopted shelter animals. Clifford placed the crate on the stainless steel table. Jenna opened it and carefully lifted Dusty out, her hands skilled, quick, but tender. She examined the pup thoroughly, checking temperature, gums, reflexes. The stethoscope found its place, and her brow furrowed. "Temp's 104. That's dangerous for a pup this small. Breathing shallow, too." She reached for supplies as she spoke. "It's probably an infection, from the wounds. I need to start IV fluids, antibiotics, and keep him under observation. Might need a heat lamp and maybe oxygen if it gets worse. Clifford watched, his mouth a line of resolve. How much? He asked. Jenna paused mid-motion. What? The cost. How much will all that run me? I brought what I could. He set the folded bills and coins on the counter beside her. His last stash, his safety net. Jenna looked at it, then at him. Her expression softened. You don't recognize me, do you? Clifford frowned. Should I? Jenna Myers, from Auto Tech class, Lincoln High. You taught me how to rebuild a carburetor, and how to keep my head down when the boys said I didn't belong. Clifford's eyes narrowed slightly, then widened with recognition. Redhead Jenna. Always wore steel-toe boots in the summer. She laughed. Still do. He smiled faintly, the first real smile in a long time. Then he nodded at the table. You were sharp. One of the few who could listen without showing off. Well, she said, turning serious again. Looks like it's my turn now. She placed a hand on the crate. You saved them. You cleaned them up. You brought them here when it mattered. You're not paying a cent. Clifford opened his mouth, then closed it again. I mean it, she added, softer now. Let me do this. He looked at her, really looked, then nodded once. Jenna went back to work, inserting the IV, preparing the medication, setting the pup under a small warming lamp. Blitz sat at Clifford's feet, looking up quietly. You can take Blitz home, Jenna said. He's stable. I'll call you tonight with an update on Dusty. Clifford reached down and lifted Blitz into the crate, this time with a clean towel and a few biscuits she handed him. He paused before leaving, looking back at Dusty, now curled under the lamp, his tiny chest rising with a little more strength than before. As he opened the door to leave, Jenna called out behind him, Mr. Marlowe? He turned. You were a good teacher, she said. He hesitated, then nodded. And you're a good vet. The door clicked shut behind him. Clifford stepped back into the sunlight, carrying Blitz, not just as a rescued dog, but as a thread that somehow tied the man he used to be to the man he was becoming again. The following morning came wrapped in quiet, the kind that seeped into walls and made time move slower. Clifford Marlowe stood in his kitchen, staring at the steam rising from a chipped mug of black coffee. Blitz lay curled in a patch of morning sun near the back door, dozing fitfully, his chest rising and falling with steady rhythm. But Clifford's mind was elsewhere. Jenna had called late the previous evening. Her voice had been calm, but her words had cut deep. I reviewed Dusty's scans, she'd said. Infection subsiding, he's stable now, but I also looked at Blitz more closely while you were gone. There's bruising on the chest wall, old damage. Ribs are fine now, but there's scar tissue near the lungs. Just a little, from blunt trauma. Someone hit him hard, maybe more than once. She hadn't said more, and she didn't need to. Clifford had gone silent on the phone, his hand clenching the arm of his chair as guilt surged through him. He had seen the signs, Blitz flinching at loud noises, freezing whenever a shadow passed too fast, curling around Dusty like a soldier in the trenches. Clifford knew fear when he saw it. He had lived long enough with his own. Now he couldn't sit still. He put the mug down, laced his boots, and stepped out into the summer haze. The air smelled faintly of asphalt and honeysuckle. He locked the door behind him, casting one last look at Blitz. The pup raised his head slightly, then let it fall again. Clifford walked into town, past the post office, the church with peeling white paint, and the barber shop that hadn't changed since 1972. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, only that he couldn't let it rest. Not after knowing someone had laid hands on a creature so small. He asked questions carefully, the way an old man asks when he doesn't want to sound like he's accusing. He stopped at Casey's Hardware, where the owner, Bert, stood behind the counter, oiling the hinges of an old lantern. Bert was a stocky man in his 50s with sunburned skin and eyes like river stones. He'd known Clifford back when Clara was still alive. You ever see anyone roughing up dogs? Clifford asked. Bert looked up slowly. You mean lately? Clifford nodded. Puppies, German shepherds. Bert set the lantern down. You heard about that group hanging around the south end, out near the old gas station? Clifford narrowed his eyes. The one near Ridgeview Road? Yeah, empty lot now. Kids used to hang out there, not anymore. Few months back, some fellas were squatting there. Looked like ex-cons or runaways, all tats and pit bulls. Sheriff ran 'em off eventually. But word is, they used to train dogs there. Rough stuff. What kind of rough? Meaning they weren't teaching fetch, Bert said, face hardening. Used them for fighting practice. Some say they dumped the ones that didn't make the cut. Clifford's jaw tightened. He thanked Bert and stepped outside, the information ringing in his ears like a warning bell. He made his way toward Ridgeview Road, past a boarded-up cafe and a shuttered thrift store, until he reached the rusted gates of the old gas station. The place had long since surrendered to weeds and graffiti. The sign above the entrance, once reading Ernie's Fuel and Ice, was missing letters now. A field of cracked concrete stretched beyond, littered with broken glass and the husks of abandoned tires. Clifford stood at the edge, not stepping in just yet. He scanned the space, imagining the echoes of barking, the dull thud of fists hitting walls, the sharp cries of dogs pushed too far. A movement caught his eye, not in the lot, but in the alley beside it. A boy, maybe 14, lean and tan with wild black curls under a tattered ball cap, leaned against the side wall, chewing a toothpick and watching Clifford with guarded eyes. He wore a gray hoodie despite the heat and had a skateboard tucked under one arm. Clifford approached slowly. "You hang around here much?" The boy shrugged. "Sometimes. Ain't illegal to stand, is it?" "Not asking for trouble," Clifford said. "Just information." "What kind?" "About dogs, and the men who used to be here." The boy studied him, then kicked at a piece of gravel. "I seen 'em, few months back. Big guys, always shouting, had cages in the back, brought dogs in and out like tools. Didn't feed 'em much." "You ever see Puppies?" "One, real small shepherd, scrawny thing. Wouldn't bark. One of the guys got mad and kicked it. I think they dumped it near Bramble. I heard him say, waste of food." Clifford's hands curled into fists. "What happened to them?" "Cops came, place cleared in a day, but guys like that don't just vanish." "What's your name, kid?" "Eli." "Eli, thanks." The boy nodded once, then skated off down the street without another word. Clifford remained there a long moment, breathing in the scent of sunburned asphalt and rust, heart pounding beneath the quiet. Now he knew. Someone had made Blitz and Dusty suffer, and not just out of neglect, but choice. Back home, he found Blitz asleep again, curled in the corner near the crate he'd come to treat as a den. Clifford sat nearby and reached out, resting a hand on the pup's back. The contact made Blitz stir, then settle again. "You're safe now," he said aloud, not to convince the pup, but maybe himself. Later that night, after the porch light had been switched off and the town settled into silence, Clifford sat in the armchair with Blitz asleep on a folded blanket at his feet. He kept replaying what the boy had said. Waste of food. The words gnawed at him. Jenna called again just past 10. "Dusty's improving. He stood today, took milk on his own." Clifford closed his eyes and exhaled. "Thank you." "I also filed a report," she said carefully, "about the injuries. I don't have names, but if this was organized abuse, we need to follow up." "I'll help," Clifford said. "If I can." There was a pause, then Jenna's voice softened. "You already are." The mornings had begun to soften in Fairford, the brutal edge of summer yielding to cooler breezes that rustled through the cornfields, like whispered promises of autumn. Clifford Marlowe stood in his backyard under a sky streaked with peach and rose, arms crossed, watching the two pups tumble across the patchy lawn. Blitz, slightly larger now, had regained his strength. He charged forward in bursts, pouncing on blades of grass as if they were enemies to conquer. Dusty, still smaller but quick, darted between Blitz's legs with unexpected agility. There was a fire in him that Clifford hadn't seen even in Ranger's younger days. Not just energy, but focus. Clifford crouched, knees popping in protest, and whistled. Dusty stopped mid-sprint and turned his head. Clifford lifted a hand and gave a small wave. "Come here, boy." Without hesitation, Dusty bounded over, his paws skimming the ground, stopping just short of Clifford's outstretched hand. "Well, I'll be," Clifford muttered, almost smiling. He glanced at Blitz, who was distracted by a moth dancing in the air, then back to Dusty. "You're a quick study, ain't you?" For the past week, Clifford had started with the basics. Sit, stay, come, leave it. He hadn't planned to, but Dusty had shown signs of wanting to learn, reacting to voice tones, eye contact, hand movements. Blitz, while more playful and stubborn, followed Dusty's lead once he realized there were treats involved. They trained in short bursts, Clifford timing sessions between his coffee and the sun's rise. He didn't bark orders. He guided, using old habits from his teaching days. Patience, repetition, reward. And over time, the bond between them grew tight, like threads braided together through quiet rituals and shared space. Inside, the home had changed too. The room once filled with dust and disused furniture now held a soft dog bed, a toy bin, and 2 food bowls etched with names in black marker. Clifford didn't even remember doing it. Just that one night, it had felt natural to take out a Sharpie and make their place official. He still didn't sleep much, but when he did, it was lighter, less haunted. That same morning, as Clifford sipped his coffee in the kitchen, Blitz dozing at his feet, a soft knock came at the door. Not Martha. She never knocked. She just let herself in with a tray of something warm. Clifford opened the door and found a man in his late 30s, tall, thin, and clean-shaven, holding a small audio recorder and a manila folder tucked beneath one arm. "Mr. Marlowe?" the man asked. Clifford hesitated. "Depends who's asking." "I'm Neil Cawley," the man said quickly, "from KFRT 88.5, the local radio station." Clifford frowned. "The gospel channel?" "We do a lot more than that," Neil replied, his voice friendly, if slightly rushed. He wore khakis and a short-sleeved button-up shirt that looked like it hadn't been ironed. "We do human interest stories. Someone sent us a video. One Dr. Jenna Myers, she posted it on her clinic page, about you rescuing the dogs." Clifford sighed and opened the door wider. "I'm not here to poke around," Neil said. "I just wanted to ask if you'd consider coming on for a short segment. Nothing fancy. Just talk about what happened, how the dogs are doing, what it's meant to you." "I'm not one for microphones," Clifford muttered. Neil smiled politely. "We figured you'd say that. So, if you're more comfortable, we can just record it right here. Or, if you'd rather not at all, I understand." Clifford looked down at Blitz, who wagged his tail once in greeting, then back at the man. "I'll think on it." "Of course," Neil said, handing over a card. "You've got a voice people might need to hear, and, well, it's not every day a town like Fairford gets something good to talk about." Later that evening, Clifford sat on the porch with the pups lying at his feet. Martha arrived, as she often did, with a plate of something sweet and a newspaper folded under her arm. Her silver hair was pinned back with a clip shaped like a leaf. She wore a linen dress the color of dusty lavender. "You've got admirers," she said, setting the plate down and unfolding the paper. There, on the local section front page, was a photo, not of Clifford, but of Blitz and Dusty. Blitz had his head cocked curiously at the camera. Dusty sat alert beside him, ears perked like antennae. Clifford raised an eyebrow. "Didn't authorize that?" "Didn't need to," Martha said, smirking. "Jenna sent it in. There's a little write-up about second chances and kindness. I think it made half the town cry." Clifford grunted but said nothing. "You should talk to the radio folks," Martha added after a pause. "Even if just once. There's something about your story that reminds people to try again." He looked away. "I'm not looking for attention." "I know," she said. "That's why it matters." That night, Clifford stood at the back fence, arms resting on the worn wood, watching the stars appear one by one. Behind him, Blitz chased moths, and Dusty practiced his sit and wait without being asked. He thought of the boy Eli, of the bruises Jenna had found, of the long road that led 2 small dogs to a ditch outside Bramble Field, and he thought of how close he'd come to walking past them. Now they were family. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to tell that part of the story. The day Clifford Marlowe finally agreed to speak on the radio was overcast, as if the sky itself had paused to listen. The usual blaze of summer had given way to a muted silver light that hung low over Fairford, pressing gently against the rooftops and the telephone poles that lined Main Street like sentries watching time drift past. Clifford had shaved that morning for the first time in weeks. His weathered face looked almost unfamiliar in the mirror, lean, with hollows beneath the cheekbones and pale gray stubble that gave way to skin like dry riverbed. He wore his cleanest flannel, buttoned to the collar, and the same boots that had followed him through fields, garages, and graveyards. Blitz and Dusty watched from the doorway as Clifford adjusted his cap. He bent to scratch their ears one by one, murmuring quiet promises of return. They'd grown so much in just a few weeks, bodies stronger, eyes wiser. They understood more now. He saw it in the way they responded to his voice, in the way Dusty tilted his head when Clifford said the word, "wait." He stepped outside just as Martha appeared at the gate with a warm thermos and a tin of lemon biscuits. She wore her usual pastel sweater despite the heat, and her silver hair was pinned back with a small barrette shaped like a bird in flight. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked, pressing the thermos into his hands without waiting for an answer. He hesitated. "No, but it's not about being ready." She nodded, eyes softening. "I'll keep an eye on the boys, don't worry." KFRT 88.5 was housed in the second floor of a red brick municipal building that once served as a post office. The studio was small, warm, and smelled faintly of paper and solder. Neil Cawley greeted him with a firm handshake and a smile that carried both excitement and care. Clifford was guided into a booth that felt more like a closet with wires. A simple microphone stood between him and a pane of glass. Neil sat on the other side, headphones already on, signaling with 2 fingers as the intro music faded into silence. "Welcome back, listeners," Neil said, his voice smooth, practiced. "Today, I've got a guest whose story you might have already heard. A man who found something unexpected on the side of the road and ended up finding himself along the way. Mr. Clifford Marlowe." Clifford cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the tiny room. "Thanks for having me. You've become something of a quiet hero around here. 2 puppies, left for dead. What made you stop that day?" Clifford's voice came low and even. "Didn't feel like heroics, just couldn't walk past them." Neil leaned closer to the mic. "I understand you weren't always one for animals." Clifford gave a dry smile. "Was once. Had a dog named Ranger, German Shepherd. Big, smart, too loyal for his own good." "You mentioned to me before the interview that Ranger saved your life once?" There was a pause. Clifford looked at the table, his hands clenched on his knees. He hadn't told that story in years, not aloud. "It was a winter storm," he began slowly. 6, maybe 7 years back. I was driving home from my daughter's place out in Topeka. Ice on the road. My truck slid off a bridge and into a creek bed. Crushed my leg under the dash. Neil sat still, not interrupting. I was alone, cold as death out there. Couldn't reach my phone. Ranger was in the back seat. Got out through the window, climbed up the embankment and barked for hours, maybe more. Someone finally stopped. Paramedics said if he hadn't gotten out, I'd be gone. His voice cracked on the last word. He coughed, tried again. Later that year, he chased a deer across Holloway Street. Got hit. Died in my arms before I could get him help. Silence held the room like a breath waiting to break. I didn't have it in me after that. Told myself no more dogs, no more hurt. Neil spoke gently. But then you found Blitz and Dusty. "Yeah," Clifford said. "Or maybe they found me." He didn't realize he was crying until a tear struck the back of his hand. He didn't wipe it away. "I reckon Ranger sent them," he added quietly. When the show ended, Neil didn't rush him out. They shook hands in silence, the way men do when words have already been spent. That afternoon, Clifford returned home to find Martha in the backyard, seated in a lawn chair with Dusty in her lap, and Blitz snoozing nearby in the shade. She looked up as he approached and smiled, though her eyes were red. "Listened from start to end," she said, holding up a small portable radio. "So did they. I think Blitz likes your voice." Clifford sat down beside her in the grass, slow and stiff. The pups gathered around him instantly, Dusty pressing his head into Clifford's ribs. "I found something," Martha said after a moment. She pulled a small envelope from her pocket and handed it to him. Inside was a worn photograph. Ranger, sitting in the bed of Clifford's old truck, ears alert, tongue lolling, eyes sharp with joy. "I'd tucked it away a long time ago," she explained. "Didn't want to give it back until I thought you were ready." Clifford traced the edges of the photo with one finger. "I think I am now." She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "You should go see him." He nodded. 2 days later, Clifford drove alone for the first time in months, the truck rumbling down Route 17 toward the next town over. The small cemetery there rested under a canopy of oak trees, the stones modest, the grass always trimmed. He parked beneath a crooked elm and walked the narrow path until he found the plot, a simple stone marked Ranger, loyal to the end. He knelt, knees aching but willing, took out the photo, set it gently against the marker. "I kept my word," he said, voice steady. "Didn't forget how to love." The wind shifted then, brushing through the trees like a whispered blessing. The road back from the cemetery wound through the quieter edge of town, where suburban sprawl thinned into neglected cul-de-sacs and half-built housing developments left to decay. Clifford Marlowe had planned only a brief detour, intending to let the silence stretch after visiting Ranger's grave. The visit had left his chest heavy and light all at once, like something inside had been broken open and let go. The sun was low now, the shadows longer. He slowed the truck as he passed an overgrown lot filled with rusted machinery and thistle. It was the kind of place kids might dare each other to enter at night, but otherwise forgotten. That's when he saw it. Movement near the tree line. A white pickup truck idled just off the gravel. Its body was scuffed, the bed covered by a stained tarp. A man stepped out, broad-shouldered, stocky, wearing a black tank top and cargo pants. Tattoos snaked down his arms. Clifford could only make out the back of his head. A buzz cut, reddish blonde. The man opened the tailgate and yanked something from the truck bed. It was a dog. Thin, limping, too weak to resist. The man shoved it to the ground. The dog, medium-sized, matted gray fur, stood shakily, ribs showing beneath its coat. Clifford's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The man tossed a half-empty bag of dry food on the ground, got back in the truck, and drove off, heading east. Clifford didn't hesitate. He turned the truck around, keeping a few car lengths back, careful to avoid kicking up dust. He followed the vehicle down a stretch of back roads until it turned sharply through a pair of leaning metal gates, then disappeared behind a line of weather-worn sheds at what looked like an abandoned salvage yard. Clifford parked his truck further down the road, behind a stand of scrub pine. He got out and moved quietly along the edge of the fence line. The sun was nearly gone now, the sky stained with the last amber of day. A gap in the fencing offered just enough view to glimpse the yard. The place was a mess of chain-link cages, half-collapsed sheds, and industrial junk. But what held Clifford still was the movement. Dozens of them. Dogs, puppies, adults, different breeds, mostly German shepherds and pit bulls, some missing fur and patches, others limping or lying too still. The cages were crude, makeshift fencing, tarps for roofs, and bowls of stagnant water. 3 men walked to the grounds. One was the stocky man from the truck. Another, taller, wore a black hoodie and moved with a twitchy gait. The third was older, maybe in his 60s, bald and gaunt, with a limp. He sat on a plastic lawn chair with a cigarette dangling from his lips. Clifford reached for his phone. His hands trembled as he held it over the fence and began recording, zooming in on the cages, the injuries, the men. He stayed for nearly 10 minutes, heart pounding, before backing away from the fence and returning to his truck. Dust clung to his boots. He drove straight back to town. It was after 8 when he knocked on the clinic door. The lights inside were dimmed, but Jenna Myers was still there, seated at her desk in the back office. She looked up in surprise when she saw Clifford's face through the glass. "Clifford, everything all right?" He stepped in, closed the door behind him. "I need to show you something." She followed him to the counter, where he laid the phone flat and hit play. The video played in silence. Jenna's face stiffened, then darkened, her hands clenched. "Where is this?" "Out near Ridgemont," Clifford said. "Salvage yard off the old industrial road." "That's... God," she muttered. "I've seen injuries like that. I just didn't think it could be this organized. They're breeding and dumping, fighting, maybe worse." Jenna paced, then grabbed her phone. "We can't wait," Clifford added, "but I know you'll need more than this." Jenna nodded. "I'll contact Officer Reynolds. He's worked on animal cruelty cases before. But yes, we'll need better footage, plates, faces, evidence it's happening in real time." Clifford's eyes didn't flinch. "Then we go back." "You mean together?" "I've got history with people like that," he said. "They don't care if it's illegal. They care if they get caught." She hesitated. "I'm not trained for field work. You know dogs. I know danger. That makes 2 of us who give a damn." Jenna stared at him for a long beat. Then she nodded slowly. "All right. But we do this right. Careful. And only if the officer agrees." The next day, Clifford returned home to find Martha on the porch. She wore a sun hat too large for her head and held a small envelope in one hand. "I heard about the interview. she said. And, well, I figured you might need these. She handed him 3 old photos. All were of Ranger. One showed the dog mid-jump, catching a frisbee in his jaws. Another was taken at the lake, wet and smiling as dogs do. The third was in front of Clifford's garage, Ranger resting with his head on Clifford's boot. "They're good reminders," Martha said, "of what you're capable of." Clifford didn't respond right away. He ran his thumb across the glossy surface of the photo and nodded, then looked up. "Martha, would you keep Blitz and Dusty a couple days?" She smiled, already stocked up on biscuits. The plan was simple, which made Clifford trust it even less. But simplicity was often a mask for courage. Lean, efficient, and full of cracks. They had decided on the night of the full moon, not for symbolism, but for visibility. The salvage yard wouldn't have security cameras, but the moonlight would help them move fast without flashlights giving away their position. Clifford stood just outside the clinic, the truck parked and humming quietly. Blitz and Dusty sat in the back, calm but alert. He'd trained them with hand signals the past 2 days, reinforcing basic cues. Stay, come, quiet. Dusty had taken to it with eerie focus. Blitz was slower but loyal once he understood. Jenna emerged from the clinic wearing a dark hoodie and jeans, her red hair pulled into a tight braid. She carried a satchel filled with medical supplies and a compact camera strapped over her chest. She looked tense, but her hands were steady. The third person to join them arrived on foot. Officer Duke Hart was younger than Clifford had expected, 28 at most, tall, biracial, with close-cropped curls and sharp green eyes that didn't miss much. He wore plain clothes, a black windbreaker over tactical pants and worn sneakers. A quiet presence, but not passive. His posture was watchful, trained, and just a little guarded. "You sure about this?" Clifford asked, sizing him up. Duke gave a small nod. "Got clearance from the chief. We're off duty, but if we gather enough footage and GPS tags, we'll get a warrant in less than a day." Clifford gave a grunt of approval. "You ever do this before?" "Not like this," Duke said. Then, after a beat, "But I've waited too long to make up for something. This feels right." They drove in silence, heading back to the salvage yard where Clifford had first seen the truck. Jenna sat in the passenger seat, reviewing a list of signs to watch for. Limping, ear tags, infected wounds. Duke sat in the back beside the crate of dog treats and motion sensors. Just before they turned off the main road, Duke spoke again. "I had a dog once, when I was a kid. Shepherd Lab mix. We called him Toby. Dad brought him home drunk, like a prize he didn't deserve. When he sobered up, said we couldn't keep him. One night, drove us out to a forest and told me to let him go. He looked away from the window, jaw tight. I was 12. I did what I was told, but I never forgot how Toby ran after the car. I saw him in the mirror until the trees took him." The truck was quiet for a moment longer. "You didn't fail that dog," Clifford said. "Your father did." Duke nodded once. "Still, that's why I joined. Thought if I could protect someone else's, maybe I could silence that part of me." Clifford respected the confession. Not because it was honest, but because it wasn't easy. Men like Duke didn't offer softness unless it had hardened into something stronger. When they reached the yard, the gate was cracked open. Jenna, per the plan, stayed outside to monitor the live feed through her camera. Duke and Clifford entered with Blitz and Dusty, leashed but alert. Their role was twofold: search and serve as cover. If anyone saw them, they'd look like 2 dog walkers scoping the place out or retrieving lost animals. Inside, the stench hit immediately. Urine, old metal, rotting food. The dogs were where Clifford remembered them, packed into makeshift cages, barely sheltered from the wind. Some barked, others whimpered. A few were silent, their eyes glassy with fatigue or fear. Clifford moved toward the far sheds while Duke scanned each kennel for movement and checked tags. A pit bull with a swollen leg snapped weakly at the bars before retreating. Duke leaned in. "This one's got a tag." He snapped a photo, then checked the GPS code against the rescue registry Jenna had loaded on their burner tablet. "Stolen 3 months ago from Lockhart County." Clifford unclipped a bolt cutter from his belt. "We're taking him." They moved quickly, freeing each dog one by one, tying ropes into loose leads. Most were too weak to run, but they followed without protest. Dusty led the way, ears perked, stopping often to sniff the air and look back at the cages, as if counting souls. In less than 40 minutes, they had gathered 10 dogs, 8 adults and 2 puppies. Some limped, others had gashes or missing fur. One limped on 3 legs but wagged his tail nonstop, as if gratitude were its own energy source. As they guided the dogs toward the back exit, movement from the shack made everyone freeze. A man stepped out. The same red-haired brute Clifford had followed before. Duke reacted first, pulling a flashlight and turning it on the man's face. "Police! Don't move!" The man blinked, squinted. "This is private property. What the hell?" "I've got evidence of stolen dogs, abuse, and illegal breeding," Duke said sharply. "You're done." The man made a move toward a side door, but Blitz, unprompted, darted forward with a warning growl. Clifford gave one sharp whistle. Blitz stopped, standing his ground, eyes locked on the man's hand. The man backed down. By the time the county sheriff's team arrived, called by Jenna using their signal code, Clifford was helping 2 of the larger dogs into the back of the police transport. The sky had begun to lighten, tinged pink and blue at the edges. As the handlers took statements, Duke leaned against the truck, watching the operation unfold. "You were right," he said. "About what?" Clifford asked. "Some debts you don't repay. You just make sure no one else has to carry them." Jenna joined them, her hoodie smudged with dirt, eyes tired but proud. "We got enough footage for prosecution, maybe more. Some of these dogs, they'll need months. But they've got a chance now." Clifford didn't say much. He just opened the truck door. Blitz and Dusty leapt in without command, Dusty curling beside his brother like always. As the sun lifted over the distant fields, Clifford looked out at the road ahead. Not just asphalt and sky, but something else, the path forward. The days that followed the rescue unfolded like waves after a storm, unexpected, relentless, and filled with a kind of light Clifford Marlowe hadn't known he'd been missing. The operation had been reported in the local paper first, then picked up by regional news. By the end of the week, a journalist from Kansas City had written a long-form piece titled "The Mechanic Who Broke the Chain." Clifford didn't own a computer, but Martha did. She brought printouts to his porch every morning, bound together with ribbon like they were love letters. Comments, emails, typed out posts from people he didn't know. One morning she handed him a stack thicker than usual, the top sheet stamped with a postmark from Utah. "This one's different," she said, eyes soft. "I think you ought to read it yourself." Clifford sat down on the porch steps, the wood warm beneath him, and opened the letter. "Dear Mr. Marlowe, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I needed to write anyway. 2 years ago, I left an abusive relationship with nothing but a suitcase and my dog, Ginger. She saved me more than once. A few months later, he found us and took her from me. I searched for days, posted flyers, cried on every doorstep. I never saw her again. I gave up believing in good people. Then I read about you. You didn't just save those dogs. You reminded people like me that goodness still breathes in this world, that quiet people still do loud things when it matters. Thank you." A stranger who believes again. Clifford read the letter twice, then a third time. By the fourth, his hands had begun to tremble, and he set the paper down gently, like something sacred. He looked across the yard where Blitz and Dusty were chasing each other in circles around the old bird bath. Dusty had a sock in his mouth. Clifford's sock, in fact, and Blitz was doing his best to reclaim it with more enthusiasm than strategy. Clifford let out a long breath. It wasn't quite a sigh, more like the exhale of someone realizing he'd been holding it for years. That afternoon, Martha appeared again, this time with a basket of apples and a grin he hadn't seen in months. "I'm having a few guests over," she said. "You're included." Clifford raised an eyebrow. "What kind of guests?" "The small, loud, sugar-fueled kind." She meant children. By 5 o'clock, the backyard of Clifford's once quiet home was alive with sound. Martha had invited the neighborhood kids, a half-dozen of them, ranging from 4 to 10, and their parents had dropped them off with the kind of wary optimism that city parents reserved for any event not involving screens. There was Lucas, age 7, with wild red curls and a missing front tooth, who immediately challenged Blitz to a race and lost with dramatic flair. Then came Ellie, 5, quiet and serious, who sat cross-legged by Dusty with a book in her lap, occasionally reading aloud in the voice of a princess. The twins, Theo and Max, wore matching Batman shirts and insisted on being called the Bark Brothers. No one knew why. Martha had set up a folding table with lemonade, paper cups, and peanut butter cookies shaped like bones. Clifford, uncomfortable at first, stood by the fence with his hands in his pockets, watching like a man guarding treasure he didn't quite believe he owned. But slowly the edges of him softened. He tossed a ball for Blitz. He helped Dusty learn to catch a soft frisbee. When Lucas tripped and scraped his knee, Clifford knelt beside him, handed him a cool rag, and said, "You'll heal faster than you think." The boy looked at him like he was a wizard, and when the sun dipped low and the sky turned watercolor gold, Martha handed Clifford a glass of lemonade and sat beside him on the porch steps. "Your house sounds different now," she said. Clifford nodded. "Haven't heard it laugh in years." She looked at him with that steady gaze of hers. "You think you're the only one healing in all this?" He didn't answer. Later, after the kids had been picked up and the backyard returned to quiet, Clifford found himself standing in the hallway near the old photo wall. Pictures of Clara, of Ruth as a girl, grinning with a missing tooth and chocolate on her chin. A framed paw print from Ranger's last vet visit. And now, tucked into the corner of the frame, the letter from the stranger in Utah. He didn't need a frame for it, but he wanted it near the things he could no longer speak to. In the living room, Blitz had curled up beneath the coffee table. Dusty lay half on the couch cushion, half off, snoring softly. The place smelled faintly of peanut butter, dust, and dog. Before bed, Clifford opened the window, letting the breeze drift through. He stepped out onto the porch one last time. The sky was dark, and the stars blinked faintly behind thin clouds. It felt like something had shifted. Not outside, but inside. As though for the first time in a long, long while, the darkness didn't feel so final. Not when it was filled with laughter. Not when the last sound before sleep was the breath of a dog at your feet. The morning Clifford Marlowe signed the adoption papers was clear and still, like the world had paused to give the moment its due weight. The sky above Fairford was a watercolor of soft blues, brushed with wisps of cloud, and the scent of cut grass drifted in from the neighboring yards. Inside the small office at Fairford Veterinary, Jenna Myers handed him the clipboard. Her fingers brushed his, and she smiled. Not her professional smile, but the real one, the kind that reached her eyes. "They're yours now," she said. "Officially, though I'm pretty sure they decided that weeks ago." Blitz and Dusty sat at his feet, leashes slack, tails gently sweeping the floor. Dusty looked up as if he understood, while Blitz had his tongue out, grinning like a school kid on the last day before summer break. Clifford signed his name in slow, deliberate strokes. Then he reached down and scratched both dogs behind the ears. "Welcome home, boys," he murmured. That afternoon, Clifford returned to his modest house on the edge of town and pulled out the old wooden posts he had once used to prop up a sagging fence. He had spent the past 2 days working with Duke, who turned out to be a surprisingly good carpenter, building a proper enclosure in the backyard, not because he wanted to keep the dogs in, but because he wanted to give them a space that was theirs, just like this home was now his again. He'd also hung a small sign on the gate, hand-carved, lightly painted. It read, "Home of the 3 survivors." When Martha saw it, she stood silent for a long moment, fingers brushing the carved wood like it held a story written in a language only she and Clifford understood. "3?" she asked, eyes narrowing in mock suspicion. "I count 2 dogs." Clifford just looked at her. "You know it ain't about numbers." She smiled and leaned against him, and for the first time, he didn't pull away. A few days later, they drove out together, Clifford, Martha, Blitz, and Dusty, in his old rumbling truck. They took the long road, past the church, past the schoolhouse, past the empty grain silo that kids had started painting with murals of dogs and sunflowers. They arrived at the edge of Bramble Field, the place where it had all begun. Clifford parked near the ditch where he had first found them, Blitz barely conscious, Dusty curled in on himself like he'd never known safety. The field was green now, full of wildflowers and tall grass. The wind played across it in waves, soft and unhurried. He opened the truck's back hatch and let the dogs jump out. They ran first, free and fast, spinning through the grass in dizzying circles. Dusty found a rabbit trail and sniffed along it, nose twitching. Blitz chased a butterfly that was clearly mocking him with its agility. Martha stood beside Clifford, her hand in his. "Why here?" she asked. "I needed to show them," he said, "that the place they were left to die became the place we came back to live." They sat together in the field for a long time, saying little. Clifford brought out 2 small wooden medallions he'd carved in his shed. On each, a name, Ranger and Toby. One for the dog he'd lost. One for the dog Duke never stopped carrying. He buried them side by side beneath the old oak tree, not as a farewell, but as a way of keeping them near. When they returned to town, they drove past the new structure taking shape near the edge of Holloway Road. A converted barn with wide-open windows, fresh paint, and a fenced-in run with dog toys scattered across the grass. Jenna stood out front in work boots and a ball cap, clipboard in hand. Duke knelt beside a young German shepherd missing one eye, but barking happily at a tennis ball. The sign above the barn read, "The Haven, for dogs who made it through." It had been Jenna's idea, but Clifford's story had lit the fuse. Donations poured in after the radio interview and the rescue. Volunteers signed up in droves. The town that had once whispered about the quiet old man with grease-stained hands now waved at him when he passed. Children pointed to his truck. Shopkeepers set out water bowls on the sidewalk. Jenna had asked Clifford to be the Haven's mentor, someone the kids and new volunteers could turn to. He came in twice a week, sometimes more, and simply listened. To the people. To the dogs. To the silences in between. But the biggest change had nothing to do with dogs. It came one evening when Martha didn't go home. She had brought over a peach pie, as she often did, and stayed to help him organize tools in the shed. They ended up talking on the porch until well past midnight, and when Clifford mentioned she could use the guest room instead of walking home, she smiled and said, "Only if you stop calling it the guest room." The next morning, her slippers were next to his boots by the door. She never moved out again. Their life wasn't dramatic. It was simple. And that's what made it beautiful. Mornings of shared coffee, evenings filled with barking and laughter. Martha planted a small herb garden. Clifford built a bench beneath the willow tree. Blitz and Dusty slept wherever they pleased, usually on Clifford's bed, curled like commas in the sentence of his day. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and cast the house in a glow that looked like forgiveness, Clifford stepped onto the porch. He held a photograph in his hand. One of Ranger, young and strong, standing in front of the garage with his tail mid-wag. He placed the photo in a wooden frame and set it beside the door. Martha appeared beside him, drying her hands on a dish towel. "You miss him?" "Every day," Clifford replied, "but I think he'd like what we've built." They stood there for a long moment, watching Dusty chase a frog through the yard, while Blitz stood guard over a tennis ball like it was sacred treasure. "Do you think dogs remember?" Martha asked. "I think they remember kindness," Clifford said, "and I think they return it when we need it most." She took his hand. And in that summer house, built not from lumber but from second chances, the 3 survivors lived forward, not as victims of what had been lost, but as witnesses to what had finally been found. Sometimes, miracles don't come with lightning or thunder. They come as soft footsteps on an old porch. They come as 2 broken puppies in a ditch. They come as a tired man who still chooses to stop. Clifford didn't ask for a second chance, but grace found him anyway. In the quiet corners of everyday life, when the world isn't watching, God still moves. Through the kindness of neighbors, through the wag of a tail, through the soft rustle of a heart opening again after years of silence. This story reminds us that redemption doesn't need applause. It just needs someone to say, "I won't walk away." So, if you're holding on to guilt, grief, or fear, know this: God isn't finished with you yet. Even in the darkest fields, he plants seeds. And one day, like Clifford's house, your life will bloom again. Not in grand gestures, but in laughter, bark, and love. May the Lord bless you for watching this story. May he guard your family, heal your wounds, and bring you home to yourself. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to believe again. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories of faith, healing, and the bond between humans and animals. You never know who you might save by clicking that share button. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness is the loudest prayer of all. God bless you.